want to welcome the live stream viewers. We are starting out, actually today is the day before Valentine's Day, and we wish all of you happy Valentine's Day tomorrow. This is the ABC Adult Bible class, Sunday School class at New Life Community Church in Fair Oaks, California. And this morning we're starting a new series on the Sermon on the Mount. But what I want to talk about especially to begin with is foundations. Foundations are so important.
TV off, it keeps bringing up a bunch of stuff. That's what Kathy giggled about.
Just be happy.
It comes on when he doesn't want it to come on.
Now it won't come on to distract you anymore.
It might.
But it would have the whole time if I hadn't unplugged things. For those who are viewing the usual screen stuff, my computer is not cooperating with me this morning. And one might say, well, you ought to get a new computer, but that's the problem. I got a new computer. And it and I don't talk very well together. But foundations. There are so many things that are done superficially and are not grounded and founded on the solid rock. Foundations are mostly unseen. This building that we're in, I'm sure it has a foundation. And it might be that if you went out and you looked close at the bottom of the wall that you could see the top of the foundation. I haven't tried, but basically foundations aren't something that you see, and they're just always there, or they better be. The foundation determines the shape of a building. Wherever the foundation goes, that's where the walls go. In Africa, in the Congo, which was then called Zaire. In our earlier days, the national superintendent was going to have a house built, and he got someone to draw plans, and he got guys to put the foundation in. But they didn't have enough money to go ahead, and there were all kinds of complications. And he came to me and said, I need to work on my house, and this fella drew plans, but I really need help with it. And because I'd taken architectural drawing in high school, I had some idea about what you needed to do. And so I took the measurements of what they had. The foundation was already there. And I added some foundation, and I created it in a way that would best serve the national superintendent and all his visitors that naturally come. And eventually, that house was built. I have stayed in it a couple of times. But first of all, I had to start with that a little bit strange foundation with some modifications that I gave them to create the shape of that house. Now, when you make a foundation, there are guys in this class who know a lot more about it than I do. And if Vern were here this morning, he seems to have quite a bit of information about it. But when we were making foundations there for a church or a Bible school, they always use these big red rocks, a lot of iron in them, and the mason puts those in place and puts cement around them, and the foundation gets built. Now, I think here you just pour the whole foundation, right? Is that right, Andre? That's when you have enough cement. But back in the 70s, we were paying $25 a bag for cement, and we didn't have many $25, and so you use these big rocks. And then the mason has to make it with that cement. But wait a minute, the cement has to have sand in it, and it's got to be to the right measure. And if you put more sand, then you don't need as much cement, but it's not as strong. So the contents of the foundation are very important. And do you put reinforcing steel in? A good foundation, I guess you'd put in reinforcing steel. If you don't have steel, then you don't have as much strength in it. Maybe to spiritualize it a little bit, if you don't have some backbone in your foundation, you haven't got as much to stand on. How thick it is. Now, if you make just a little foundation with just a narrow little thing, how much of a building are you going to build on that? Or are you going to make it big enough that you can build more on it? As I understand it, and I'm not an authority on this subject, the church building over there with the chapel where we were meeting until all the construction thing changed temporarily. The original thought was, well, we'll put another layer of classrooms above the chapel in those classrooms, and that sounded like a great idea, but it doesn't have the foundation to support the additional level. So the foundation that you have determines how much growing you can have. I remember when I was in high school, my dad was the pastor in Auburn, and we built church out on Highway 49. And Winston Steel was the company that made the tilt-up concrete to build the church. And they put down the piers and foundation, and the inspector came out, and he looked at how deep they had dug to put the foundation and the piers. And he said, oh, no, you don't. That doesn't go down to bedrock. You've got to dig more. You've got to go down further to support this church, to support these cement walls that they were going to put up. Well, the contractor wasn't happy. That meant he had to do a lot more work and more expense. But getting the foundation down to the depth that it needs to be is crucial. And, of course, in order to pass inspection, they had to do it. And the first instance, the contractors told my dad, well, this is going to take longer. And oh, no, he didn't want it to take longer. And then he realized, wait a minute, he was going to have a stronger church because he was going to have a better foundation. And then there was, going back to Africa, we were brand new missionaries. We were still learning the Bangala language. They had just built the Tucker Memorial Church, a beautiful church that had required an excellent mason and other missionary who'd been so involved in building the church. Had a mason named Ramey who was such a good worker. And he said, Daryl, you've got to keep work for Ramey because you don't want to lose him because he's such a good mason. And Daryl didn't know anything about what he was doing. He was just trying to learn the Bangala language. And so I said, okay. And I would find little busy work for Remy to do every day when he'd show up for work. And then one day, Pastor John Pierre came and said, Juana, you've got Remy, and he's not doing anything worthwhile, and we want to build a church at Kamako, and we need a mason. Will you send him out there? Oh yeah, that means I don't have to find work for him for a while, but they were they were making adobe blocks. You know, it's just mud that you put in a form and it dries, and you build the wall with adobe. And here again, they used the big red rocks for the foundation. But for this adobe type building, which is not all that permanent, they dig the trench and they put the rocks in, and they fill mud between the rocks to hold the rocks in place. And so you have a foundation that's made with rocks and mud. Now I'm not talking about the kind of mud I know people who are plasterers, they talk about the mud they put on the walls. It's not that kind of mud. This is dirt mud. And so you've got this foundation that he made for Pastor John Pierre. And it was all fine. And then they got some cement, and he did a cement plaster over the outside of this foundation. So it looked like it was cement. But all it was a thin layer of plaster. And it looked fine. And that was part of the purpose. Now they're going to put the mud blocks on it, the adobe. And they're going to build their church. Well, all these things take time to make the adobe blocks and so forth. And in the meantime, another pastor came. And he saw that beautiful foundation. And he somehow made an arrangement with the Catholic mission up the road. They burned bricks, which burnt bricks are pretty permanent. That's the kind of bricks you want to have. And of course, they're much smaller. But he made a deal with the Catholics. He would make 2 adobe bricks in exchange for 1 burnt brick. Means he and his people had to make a lot of adobe brick. But this way they would have permanent burnt brick. And they did it. And, you know, it took many months, if not years, to build that church. And in the meantime, I've learned Bangala, and I've moved to Andudu, and I come back, and here's this beautiful little brick church. Except I know what's in the foundation. That pastor who decided to build permanent on temporary, or what would be a better word than temporary? It just wasn't right. And every time through the years, there would be an occasion that I would go to a service at that church. I would look around the walls. And there in the back wall, I began to notice there was a big crack developing in those burnt brick, in the permanent stuff that's built on the temporary. Hello? I don't know what it looks like today. It's been many years since I've been there. But I hate to think of the sadness that's going to be when those walls start falling away, because the foundation is faulty. It was made for temporary. There was nothing wrong with what they did. But then it got covered. How many Christians get a superficial experience and then learn the vocabulary and the music and they know when to go and when to come, but it's kind of that fake covering that looks real, but the foundation in their heart is lacking. The foundation determines the strength of the building. Now in Matthew 16:13, Matthew 16:13, it won't be on the screen because it's not working today. Matthew 16:13, when Jesus came into the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, "Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" So they said, "Some say John the Baptist, some Elijah, others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered and said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus answered and said to him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter," which is a stone, "and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." What is the rock? You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. That is our foundation.
Amen.
Jesus is our rock, and we are firmly established on him. I was going to sing "The Solid Rock," but since the words wouldn't be up there for you and I didn't print them out, maybe I'll skip that. But moving on, at this point you're probably saying, he said he was going to preach on the Sermon on the Mount. Well, now we're going to the Sermon on the Mount, understanding that Jesus is the rock, the foundation. Are any of you like me? You go to someone's house for dinner and it smells so good, and you see that beautiful pie sitting there. And you say, "Can we begin with the dessert?" Lila, are you guilty of that? No?
You've been around Randy too much.
I'd rather have the vegetables.
Oh, the dessert first. I've never been able to get anyone to do that. But the Sermon on the Mount, we're going to begin with the end. We're going to go to Matthew 7:24. Sermon on the Mount begins with Matthew 5:1. But we're going to go to 7:24, which is the end of the Sermon on the Mount. "Therefore, whosoever heareth these sayings of mine, and doeth them, I will liken him unto a wise man, which built his house upon a rock. And the rain descended, and the floods came down, and the winds blew, and beat upon the house, and it fell not, for it was founded upon a rock. Every one that heareth these sayings of mine, and doeth them not, shall be likened unto a foolish man, which built his house upon the sand. And the rain descended, and the floods came down, the winds blew and beat upon that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. Reminds you of some of those houses you see on the news in Southern California where they've built them on the edge of the cliff overlooking the ocean.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, and down they go. Well, back on January 3rd in Our Daily Bread, someone wrote about this passage that we just read. The last section of the Sermon on the Mount contains the parable of the wise and foolish builders. It is important to note that this conclusion, that the first words we read here, is a parable that begins with the word therefore. And when you see therefore, you need to look to see what you're there for. A word which always connects what follows to what precedes it. I'm getting some nods like you're understanding that. If you say therefore, oh, well, what is it? It indicates a consequence or a result. Readers are to back up and consider what was written in the preceding verses, or in this case, the entire sermon. What precedes the concluding parable of the Sermon on the Mount is the entire sermon. So here at the end, Jesus is saying this sermon is like the building, the stone, the rock, the foundation of what you believe. Not merely a few verses, Jesus' challenge isn't simply to live a morally righteous life, but to live as citizens of the kingdom of heaven and to let our lives reflect the reality of God's rule in our hearts. The parable is Jesus' challenge to his listeners to put his words into practice. They're to base their lives on him and his teaching, for all other foundations shift and blow away. That was written by a J.R. Hudberg, just to give him credit, even though I don't know who he is. How many of you went to Sunday school as a kid and remember that cute little song, "The wise man built his house upon the rock"? Yeah, I'm not going to go ahead and sing the whole thing. "The foolish man built his house upon the sand." And then, if I can remember, "So build your life on," no, build your house on the Lord Jesus Christ. So build your house on the Lord Jesus Christ. And as I've thought about that this week, I almost think that cute little chorus that nearly all Sunday school kids used to learn, it almost trivializes a very important truth that Jesus used as the conclusion of his message to say how important what he has just taught is. And so as we get into the Sermon on the Mount, which we'll start next week with the Beatitudes, my series, well, I guess anybody's series in here just about. You remember how long Dave took to get through the book of James? And that's probably going to be the case with the Sermon on the Mount. We'll start out with verse 1 And seeing the multitude, he went up on a mountain, and when he was seated, his disciples came to him. And then the Beatitudes, blessed are the. But this conclusion, this that Jesus left with them, said, if you take these things that I have taught, and there are so many of them that we're going to study in Matthew 5, 6, and 7, these are the foundation you need to build your life on. There are a lot of things that we look at and that we study. They're building blocks in our Christian walk. And that's good. You got to have more than a foundation. But you've got to have the foundation for those building blocks to stand. You don't want to be like that cute little church with the crack going down the wall and say, oh, I wonder why. I've been doing all these nice things. Why, I even covered my foundation with all the pretty stuff. You know, when they make those foundations with the word in Bengal is poto poto. That's mud. And they make the poto poto foundation, and then they cover it with that plaster of cement. It looks good. It was good enough that the next pastor thought he could build a permanent building on it. And what we're concerned about is, do we have the appropriate foundation? Do we put the needed stuff in our lives that we can build our Christian walk on that permanent foundation that will not shake? And of course, that foundation is solidly planted on Jesus. I don't know. That concludes. I don't know if I would have gotten this far if I'd have had the screen or not. I suspect I might have taken longer. And we want to say thank you for those who came on the live stream. And Lord willing, we will see you again next week. Thank you.